We'll be starting here in Kansas.
It's slightly delayed, so you should get it in a second.
Oh, sorry.
There's all the a different songs.
Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So when I used to be a server, people always kind of funny. And I always be like, no, I can't.
So we're gonna stream. Anyone trying to yell back? Yeah, we're squeezing here.
John, you can't see anything on the screen. Do you know how to? Oh, it's weird. Can you hear anything yet?
Should be.
With the delay?
When did you go live?
Yeah, so go back in and see.
Do I have?
You see it? Can you hear?
He's not talking or anything.
I'm Isaac.
Yeah, they told me.
Let me get his attention.
Well, yeah, everybody does talking.
And they also gave me the bureau. Yeah, that's it.
Checking online, you guys, is there, this is great. If you are joining us online, welcome, thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, that's fine. That's weird. That's like,
Good
like
evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Loudoun County Sheriff's Office Domestic Violence Forum. My name is Dave Hill, and I will be your host and moderator for tonight's event. We are honored to have an incredible panel of experts with us tonight, so thank you all for attending and being here. For your unique perspectives and expertise on domestic violence and community support. Domestic violence is a complex and pervasive issue that affects all people and demographics. It thrives in silence and isolation. This is why forums like this are so important. Tonight, our goal is to foster dialogue, provide education, and empower our community with resources and knowledge to help combat this issue. So for housekeeping tonight, just quickly, we are meeting in person here, but we also have folks joining us online. So if you are joining us remotely, welcome and thank you. Our digital event was closed captioning. If anybody needs hearing assistance. We also have Spanish translation available here in the room. And this time, I'd like to ask everyone to silence their phones. And with that, I'd like to begin saying we are. This has been co-hosted by the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office and the Office of the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. And I'd like to welcome Sheriff Mike Chapman to the stage to say some brief remarks.
Thank you, Dave. I want to thank Majorville and Sergeant Lorraine Goldberg and Commonwealth Attorney's Office, Bob Anderson and folks over there for putting this together. It is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and as you can see, this Domestic Violence Forum. Now, we've done fentanyl forums, we've done housing worship seminars, we've done several different types of private school seminars. We've done all kinds of stuff out there, but this is the first one, the first ever domestic violence forum that's been put together, certainly as a cooperative effort between us and the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. One of the things I'd like to mention here is about a year ago, we started what's called a victim assistance unit. And the reason that we did that was because, as you know, we work hard when it comes to prevention, education, and treatment when it comes to these kinds of situations. But what we wanted to do was help victims of domestic violence in the interim while they're waiting for the legal process to take place in the event that somebody was assaulted, that they were assaulted, and you have to process that through the legal system. So what we did was we started a unit that would kind of handle that in the interim until they actually were committed within the system here in Loudoun County. So we're real proud of that, and in fact, Sergeant Goldberg has headed that up, and we got a few positions that are going to be starting here, hopefully soon, or in the budget for this year. We're going to have 3 people program in from 2 others that are going to come on board as part of that effort there. So we're looking forward to expanding our role when it comes to this very, very critical situation. Very, very happy with the fact that we're putting this together. Very, very proactive on this. And the last thing I'll mention is this: is that we try to do everything that we can from a educational standpoint, from a preventive standpoint. We do that across the board with all the different forms, all the different educational aspects that we can engage in. But one of the main things that we do, and sometimes people tend to forget, that we're law enforcement officials, and enforcement law is critical. And it's a very important aspect of what we do, and people need to realize that they've got to be held accountable for these serious crimes that take place, especially these ones that are women are the victims here. And we want to make sure we're all meant to be victims too, but for the most part, it's our women that are the victims. So we appreciate, I know I appreciate the effort that Major Hill, Sergeant Goldberg, Common Attorney's Office put together, and the person leading that effort certainly is our Commonwealth Attorney, who has been just a pleasure to work with. We're just so happy that he is in there with his number 2, Nicole Whitman. Bob Anderson. Bob, would you like to come up and say a few things? Thank you.
My name is Bob Anderson. I'm Common Attorney in Loudoun County. Thank you, Sheriff Chet, for that introduction. I can tell you that my experience with domestic violence and other issues within the county is unique to the county. I used to be the Commonwealth Attorney back in, gosh, 96 to 2003. And now I'm back, and let me tell you something. The response to the community and the people, the Sheriff's Department, I can tell you through the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, is more effective, is more precise, and gets results. I've seen it from the first time I was in here for 2 terms, and now I'm seeing it now. I recognize Elizabeth Lancaster sitting down in front. She's in the juvenile domestic court. She does her job better. She and Sheriff Crowe, better than anybody else. They really know what they do, what they're doing. This county cares. And it's so great to be a part of that. And I'm very happy to do that. So thanks for coming. Hopefully you get some information you can use. And I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Again, thank you, Sheriff Chapman and Commonwealth Attorney Bob Anderson, for your powerful words and your leadership on this issue. Next, I would like to invite Sergeant Goldberg to do a brief presentation from the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, overviewing domestic violence trends and what we're seeing here in Loudoun County today. And just as a quick administrative reminder, for anyone who's joining us online, if you're in here, you have a question and you don't want to ask it out loud here later, we are going to have a Q&A at the end of this forum. You can go online through our team meeting and ask those questions. The questions online are anonymous. So you can send those in and we'll be able to answer them or have our panelists answer them later. So as you're hearing these presentations, please feel free to send in your questions now. We'll promise to get back to them. Sergeant, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I know many of you here tonight, and I appreciate all of you being here for this very important issue. I'm excited that this is our first domestic violence forum. I'm hoping that it's first of many. And, say that you were here when we all started this early. So bear with me for a moment. I'm more of a walker and talker. I will do my best to keep you engaged for the next 15 minutes or so. But we want to provide just a broad overview of domestic violence and what it looks like here in Virginia. Some basic definitions, national facts, some local effects that we're seeing, initiatives that the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office is implemented to respond that need. It's an important programs that are a part of our response. So what is domestic violence? This definition is paraphrased from the Justice Office, and domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior. It involves the control and the power of control over another that's exerted in a variety of ways. The violence itself can be sexual, emotional, physical, economic, psychological, or technological. And we're seeing a lot more of the latter as we move forward. These behaviors involve intimidation, manipulation, humiliation, and so on. And again, the ultimate aim of all of this is power and control over a victim. As part of the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office Citizens Police Academy, which is a program that we hold twice a year, it's very, very popular. I teach about domestic violence in law enforcement and what that actually means in terms of our particular definitions within the state. Lots of folks are surprised to find that not all abusive behavior is illegal. For example, calling someone bad names. I do sometimes have victims come in and say, my spouse or this member of my family is calling me all of these names. And I have to break the news to them that that's not illegal abusive behavior, right? So it's important to understand from the perspective of law enforcement what we can actually enforce, what is illegal. The basic criminal code is 18257.2, that's domestic assault and battery. And it's got a few requirements. First and foremost, it has to involve family or household members, and that is as defined by law. Generally speaking, that means a blood relation. It requires a predominant aggressor. For example, it's not in an investigation the person who started the altercation that may be arrested. So, for example, if person A throws a bag of chips at person B, and person B knocks out person A, the predominant aggressor in that situation would be the person who exerted the most violence, did the most damage. And so officers are required to be able to determine the predominant aggressor in their investigations. If those first two qualifications are met, a family or household member relationship, and a predominant aggressor can be identified, then officers are required by law to make an arrest. They do not have discretion. It is not like a speeding ticket where an officer can say, well, let's go this time. And so many times, both aggressors and victims are surprised to learn that someone is going to jail. Many times victims will say, well, no, I just wanted you to stop the violence. I didn't want you to arrest anyone. And we have to explain, officers are required by law to complete that investigation. And if they have those first two requirements met, they are required by law to make that arrest. In addition to that predominant preliminary code 18257.2, there are a range of domestic abuse behaviors that are illegal. I made one of these presentations to high school students, and a lot of them are surprised to learn about different behaviors that are illegal. And I think that's so important for young folks to know what is acceptable and healthy behavior and what is not, and especially what is illegal abusive behavior. I included a few more code sections up there, just so you have a reference point. I'm going to go ahead and move forward. So why does domestic violence matter? Domestic violence is much more likely to happen to women. They are 5 to 8 times more likely to be victimized. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men experience physical violence by an intimate partner. Domestic violence strangulation victims are 7 times more likely to be killed by their abusers. We have a case that involves strangulation. We call that a pre-homicidal indicator. It's a big red flag for us in the domestic violence unit because it tells us that someone may have the capacity and or intention to kill that victim. Over 50% of mass shooters have a history of DV strangulation. That's another reason why we take strangulation so seriously. Offenders in a history of DV strangulation are more likely to kill women and children, and 75% of top killers at a history of DV strangulation. So again, it's a big red flag. In 2021, the UN did a study of countries that were experiencing a global pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And what they found, they actually decided to term the shadow pandemic. And that was the huge surge in domestic violence across the nation, across the globe. They found that in almost every single country, there was an increase not only in the volume of cases, but in the intensity of cases. There was an increase in domestic violence homicide, and particularly here in the US, in parricide. Parricide means children killing their parents. Right? And what we're seeing specifically domestic violence are adult children killing their parents. Unfortunately, we've had a couple of those cases here in Loudoun County. No county is immune. This is a national trend. You're seeing across the nation. And of course, as a result of the pressures of COVID-19 and all the economic effects that accompanied it, there was a huge increase in the need for mental health support. So, what are we doing at the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office to combat these issues? First, our domestic violence unit has tripled in size since 2020. We now have 3 full-time detective positions. We also have new training modules that we've implemented. Not only do we go to the Northern Virginia Criminal Justice Training Academy, where all deputies graduate from, and teach them a specific strangulation class during their TV week, but we also reiterate that training and supplement it with further DV training for every new hire that comes into the sheriff's office. Our detectives receive specialized training in everything from forensics to code interpretation to protective orders. You name it, we send them out for it. I'm very excited, as the sheriff mentioned, in October of 2023, we established a victim advocate unit. The victim advocate unit helps to fill that need for victims of violence who may not seek court for a while or may not seek court at all. It also has helped us to pinpoint those houses, those residents, those families that are ramping up toward violence, but haven't got there yet. So now we're able to identify, okay, we've been that same residence 3 times in the last 2 weeks. It hasn't gotten violent yet, but it looks like it's on track to go there. Things are escalating. So now we can reach out to that family, the victim advocate unit goes, they call them and say, hey, what do you need? How can we help? We want to prevent things from getting violent. We want to prevent that crime. We also have an co-responder program in which a deputy is accompanied by a mental health professional. That's going a long way toward helping chronic mental health issues. And then we have our fabulous, I cannot say enough great things about it, domestic abuse response team. We all, and many of the panelists today are a member of that team, their agency is. They do incredible work. In 2022, we had a new publication amendment added to the strangulation code, and that was a huge team effort. We coordinate all the time, day to day on cases, and the folks involved in that team are absolutely priceless. It goes a long way for making sure that the county stays safe and our crime rates stay low. So these are the organizations that are part of our domestic abuse response team. We meet monthly. So, of course, law enforcement, not just the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, but Leesburg PD, the Independent Municipality PD. Of course, our agency of referral, primary referral for domestic violence is laws, domestic violence and sexual assault services, humane law enforcement, child protective services, family services, pretrial probation, the Inova Fact office, and of course, the VA's office. A few numbers for you in terms of need and what we're seeing on a daily basis. The last fiscal year, we had approximately 1,466 cases. The domestic violence unit reviewed every single one of those. Of those cases, 888 were assigned to detectives for follow-up in some way, shape, or form. 76 of those cases required an emergent response, meaning that we drop everything we're doing and we go and talk to that victim and follow the case immediately. The victim advocate unit, just since October of 2023, that last fiscal year, had 527 cases. 60 of them required an emergent response. And the victim advocate unit emergent response is specifically geared for providing victims with much needed services that are critical at that time. So for example, if a victim of domestic violence has to leave the home, or her abuser is the primary breadwinner, she's going to need groceries. She's going to need a place to stay. She's going to need to be able to get kids to school safely. All of these are different areas that we can help with, help provide resource referrals, and make sure that these victims of crime have everything they need to move forward with their lives and succeed and build from that. But it's not just about post-traumatic stress, but it's about post-traumatic growth and opportunity. I did a quick breakdown here of domestic violence offenses by station. You'll see that we track both verbals and actual domestic violence active battery offenses. And the reason for that is because, like I said, we can track verbal incidents that will then lead up to violent incidents. And if we can intercede before they become violent, that helps to not only save the victim and their family, but because domestic violence affects so many people, people in the community, people in their extended family, right? And that can make a huge difference in terms of crime prevention and community safety. So the two biggest columns you'll see, the darker blue on the left, are verbal domestics, that's what we call them. Those are simply verbal disputes. Okay. The light blue on the right, that's domestic assault and battery case where you'll see that ELS is the East Loudoun station, that Ashford station, followed by the Delta South station, followed by the Western Loudoun station. And for the most part, these numbers, they are sort of averaged out by population. Western Loudoun station, that area is much less populated. Those numbers are necessarily going to be that much lower. Other elements that we're tracking on there are also protective order violations and stalking, as well as abduction cases. One of the most important programs that we have here in Loudoun County is what is called the LAP program, Lethality Assessment Program. And what it is a list of 11 questions that we offer to victims as a screening. They agree to answer those questions, then we are able to tabulate the score at the bottom. And that tells us whether that victim is at high risk of being killed by their abuser. If they're identified as being high risk, then the officer sits down with the victim and says, look, people in your circumstances have been killed by their abuser. We would like to set you up with an advocate at Laws, Domestic Violence, and Sexual Assault Services, and try to get you some resources that can help. Are you interested? And what we found is that the LAP program is overwhelmingly accurate at predicting homicide and the likelihood for it. So it's a really important tool for us because it helps us intervene in those critical cases and identify the victims that need the most help right away. In March 2018, like the Center for Incident Partners for over 16 years of age, it enables us to identify high danger victims and then connect them with those much needed resources. That's all I have for you tonight. I know that was sort of fire news and information. So if you have questions at the end of the panel that are regarding a particular presentation, please let me know. But thank you all very much for your time.
All right, thank you, Sergeant Goldberg. We are now moving to the core of tonight's event, panel discussion. So we've assembled a great panel to address some of these key questions that we've been asking. Each question will be directed towards two panelists, so I'm looking at each panelist keep their responses around 2 to 4 minutes, so we can think moving. We got something burned to add to that. Before I call you all, I'd like to introduce everybody who's being part of our panel tonight. So no particular order here. Diane Rodriguez is the Director of Domestic Violence Services and Laws. She manages a comprehensive range of services, including emergency shelter, legal advocacy, support groups for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. Diane's leadership and dedication to ensure that individuals seeking assistance receive compassionate, confidential, and empowering support tailored to their needs. Very much. Okay, we're gonna wait for you. Michelle Tracy is the Director of Victim Witness. She leads a team dedicated to providing comprehensive support to victims and witnesses of crimes, ensuring they receive necessary guidance throughout the criminal justice process. Michelle services include courtroom accompaniment, assistance, protective orders and advocacy, and ensuring victims' rights throughout the next up is Bob Anderson, who's the top attorney. He's practiced law for over 40 years. And again, his legal career after serving in the United States Army and obtained his law degree from the University. First in office in 1996, as you mentioned earlier, serving 2 terms, and then after 20 years of private practice, he's back serving Loudoun County again. Thank you for your leadership and your service. We also have Anisha Senai. She is the senior managing attorney for the Tahiri Justice Center. With over a decade of experience providing legal services to survivors of gender-based violence. She specializes in immigration and family law. She also co-chairs the organization's gender-based racism and cultural equality and equity task force, ensuring culturally competent advocacy for marginalized communities. Jackie Smith is the domestic violence probation officer with Loudoun County Community Corrections. She used the last 3.5 years to supervise men and women on domestic violence related offenses. She specializes in incident partner cases and carries a caseload of about 65 to 70 people. To her role as probation officer, she retired from the Fairfax County Police Department after 27 years. The last 15 years she spent as a domestic violence detective. Valerie Goofy is the Assistant Director of Prevention and Protective Services to Loudoun County Family Services. She has been with the Loudoun County since 2019 and has over 30 years of experience in human services. She is also an adjunct instructor at George Mason University. She helped develop the first government-based child advocacy center, outstanding, in Northern Virginia, and has worked tirelessly with government and community organizations to raise awareness and increase community capacity and enhance services. And finally, we have Sergeant Lorraine Goldberg doing this, I can welcome you all at this point in time. So guys, they get seated up here. We're going to go through a series of questions. I'll give each panelist opportunity to answer some of these. If you have additional questions, please put them online, or at the end, just raise your hand and bring a microphone over to you. You have the opportunity to ask your questions. Great. To get started, our first question would be, how does your organization define domestic violence, and what are unique aspects and considerations you include in this definition? Let's be directed towards LC's open laws.
So as I mentioned, not all abusive behaviors are actually codified as illegal in Virginia law. For the purposes of law enforcement, we look at a variety of behaviors. And that includes everything from computer trespass to stalking to simple assault. So it can be a variety of different behaviors, but there's a lot that's not codified. Offhand, I'm thinking of certain financial abuse or reproductive coercion. There's a lot that we're not really caught up on in terms of what's codified in law. So it's important to realize that folks, when they want to make a report, there's not always an immediate result in terms of pressing charges or moving forward. A lot depends on if it meets the standard for a violation. Thank you.
So I really appreciate your presentation, Sergeant Wolfberg, because it really highlights those gaps in the system and also really highlights how this is not a single agency issue. Clearly, law enforcement is not meant to carry this all and be solely responsible for the safety of our community. It takes a coordinated community effort. And so that's why this partnership that we have with the city of Scale is so important to be here and voice all the different ways that we support survivors. So at laws is a perfect example of all this, those limitations that the law has. It's important to have agencies like laws to support survivors whose situation will not be covered by the criminal system, right? It is an agency where it's solely survivor centered and we will meet survivors where they're at. There are survivors who we speak to that they're not ready to talk about what, or may call it domestic violence or don't even know that they're experiencing abuse. And so we start from there to survivors who are ready to leave, right? And everything in between. But at laws, you are guaranteed a safe, judgment-free space, confidential space to learn about your options, to safety plan with survivors who plan to stay, because maybe that's the safest option right now. We safety plan with them about, hey, these are your options. You made the decision. We're very lucky to be the only agency like ours in Virginia that has legal services. And so we have the benefit of advocate to talk to an attorney or tell them, hey, let me connect you with have free consultation with one of our attorneys to talk about your rights as a spouse, as a parent. So we're able to just provide that information, meet a lot of those needs that can't be covered by a single agency such as law enforcement.
All right, thank you for your comments. We're going to go on to our next question here. How wide the perpetrators of domestic violence use power and control? And this will be for Valerie Hoopy and Nikki Snug.
The Department of Family Services. And first, I want to echo exactly what you said about all of us being partners here. That's very important. And so when we look at the power and control, those are the driving forces to keep the person feeling victimized. And so sometimes it looks like intimidation. It's also manipulation, isolation. There's another one as well, financial control and coercion. And so it really plays on one's self-esteem, and that power and control is what keeps some people staying in the situation that they're in. It's difficult to pull away from that. And as you said, some people don't even recognize exactly what situation that they are in. So this is quite critical for those that are experiencing that power and control dynamic. So I'm going to pass.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Anushe, and I am the Senior Managing Attorney for the Tower Justice Center. We focus on serving immigrant survivors of gender-based violence. So our mission is a little bit more niche. And so in addition to what Valerie was sharing about power and control, I would add that for an immigrant survivor, there are additional layers. Particularly language barrier, unawareness of systems in the United States, fear of law enforcement. And so it's such a privilege to be here and partner together so that we can work in encouraging our immigrant communities to actually report to the police and see them as a support agency and not something to be fearful for. And then as you can imagine, immigration status is the number one factor for manipulation. Usually, if an immigrant is here in the United States, whether their intimate partner is a U.S. citizen or a non-citizen, the fear of being deported or be reported to immigration services can be a great deterrent from reporting or trying to even seek safety. Like laws, we also have a social services department because we tend to really be trauma informed and survivor centered like laws. And probably like any of the other agencies that are here on this stage. Therefore reinforcing our desire to look at survivors in a way that we can empower them and make sure that they have agency.
Thank you. I'm gonna take the liberty to add that here, you mentioned trauma informed. That's a really important topic that we all talk about a lot. Can someone give me a good definition of what trauma informed is for anyone who's not aware of that? If you want to take that, we should hear to the book.
Let's please start and then I will invite anyone to add more to it. From the perspective of an advocate, to be trauma informed, it means not to approach every situation with a cookie cutter. And so every trauma is different. Every experience is different. And so it requires a great deal of reflection and reading the room whenever one meets with a survivor. So there are specific techniques that I think come very easily in mind to any person that is asked what is trauma centered, making them comfortable, making sure that they are facing the door, for example, making sure that the door is not closed. Ask also very simple questions and being aware of body language and create a little bit that trust at the very beginning. I'm a lawyer by training and we tend to jump into the facts, tell me what happened, and then solution seeking. And so that is a behavior that needs to be moderated and not necessarily being employed right away because we want to make sure that the survivor is leading the conversation. Obviously, there has to be also awareness of what mental health looks like and what are some of the signs. And lastly, cultural competency. What I may define as rape, for example, is not necessarily how the survivor I'm working with may define. They may not even have the same verbiage as I have, and so it's important to get to know how they are viewing their own experience.
I'll add to that. Perfect. I'm like, what else can I add? But there's just, we can talk about this for a long time. I really appreciate the work that Damari does. It's really recognizing that trauma itself is not the event, but it's how someone responds to a traumatic event. So what does that mean? That the response can vary. There's no correct way to respond to trauma, and it's not like we choose how to react or respond to trauma. So having that education for the most part, that creates a lot of empathy to whoever walks through our door, because they can be showing up happy, making jokes, they can be showing up crying, they can be stoic. No way is the right way, but we're gonna meet them where they're at, create a calm environment. That's exactly, you took the words out of my head. Like, that's one of the focuses of, we do it laws, we have it laws, and we seek in other partner agencies, is to ensure, like, are we creating a safe space for survivors to feel that they can trust us and share some of the most horrific things that have happened to them. How can we build that trust, right? Especially if they've been told time and time again by the person they love most that that they can go nowhere, that they have nowhere to seek help, that they're alone. So that being trauma informed, it is like a catchy phrase, but it is true to the core how important it is for all agencies that really interact with humans need to be, but especially those interacting with survivors.
I agree with that. One of the things as a service provider that I learned early on, to be trauma informed is to ask the question, what happened to you? As opposed to what's wrong with you. And then that opens up the door for a discussion about some of the experiences that a person has had. It actually helps to normalize.
I could also add to the trauma, there's a physiological and a physical component to it as well. And so for us in victim witness and for our prosecutors, you may have a victim who has suffered domestic violence who cannot remember everything, or who may remember things at certain points in the process.
And some might look at that as, well, they may not be telling the truth, or they may be lying. Especially for our domestic violence victims who have been in this cycle for a long time. Sometimes those events run together. And so they may get different events combined with other events. And it's so easy for someone on the outside looking in to view them as not credible. And what does that do to their self-esteem? And what does that do to their willingness to come forward and to see this through? It often shuts them down because they don't want the added abuse, the added attention onto them as well. So I think all of those things combined is what we try to do collectively to empower that person to tell their story, to give them a comfortable environment, an environment that provides them the safety to.
Thank you for all those responses. If I can sum that all up, I think the real key here is everyone up here in our organization are here to listen. And that's really probably the most important part, is we start with listening first. But great responses. And move on to our next question here. This would be for Michelle Tracy and Jackie Smith. Do abusers show potential warning signs? What kind of behavioral and situational signs indicate that someone might be an abuser? How can bystanders recognize that?
So what do we mean by bystanders? That could be family, that could be friends, that could be community members, that could be coworkers. So it's not just seeing someone at the grocery store and thinking, oh, they might be in an abusive relationship there. So what things can we think about and look for? So we've talked about power and control. And what are the things that go along with that? I think the biggest one is isolation. We're talking about from family, from friends. So if you have a friend, a coworker who's not going out anymore, and maybe they used to do that before, things like that to keep in mind. Control of finances, any kind of money they don't have any access to. Tracking partners' movements, that's huge. Obviously, in today's day and age, anybody can be tracked, right? Through your cell phone, through vehicles, technologies out there, computers. So that's a big indicator right there. And I want to say that a lot of times we want the people to get out of the relationship, right? We want them to get out of the abusive relationship. That's the safest place in our eyes. But most people don't want to really leave the relationship. They just want the abuse to end. So maybe you don't realize that they're in an abusive relationship because they're just trying to hang in there and keep it together. So just keeping that in mind that they're not always going to leave, all right? But what other things can we look for? Jealousy. A lot of times the offender is very jealous. And unfortunately, they're the ones that are having the affair, not the victim, right? A lot of the abusers, it's on for probation, by the way. I don't know if I said that initially. A lot of the abusers that I deal with, the offenders, whatever you want to call them, they are so charming. They will come in there and they're, oh, it's so nice to meet you. And they're just talking it up. And it's hard for us sometimes to think, well, how could this be an abuser? Because they're being so nice to me. Is it really possible that they're so not nice with somebody else? And they're like that with their family. They're like that with their friends. They're like that with their coworkers. They're very successful at work. Maybe they have really good jobs. A lot of the people that I have are very successful. They're owners of companies, high up in banking and finance and making good money, all the way down to homeless people. So you never know financially if they're going to be successful, and they may just not be successful at home. All this stuff is happening behind closed doors. So if you have family, friends, maybe someone that you haven't seen in a while, and you're concerned about them, start to look for those cues. Michelle?
So what does an abuser look like, right? Because we want to be able to point them out. And the fact of the matter is, an abuser could look like any one of us, male or female, older or younger. How oftentimes we see on the news when a tragic event has happened, and neighbors will come out and say, but he or she was so nice. They had the best parties.
They took care of my children. You're not able to pick out an abuser just by looking at them. But there are certain characteristics, like the controlling behavior, not allowing their partner to have a phone, access to technology. Like Jackie had said, tracking them, the jealousy, and in addition, control over things like finances, the children. Sometimes I feel like I have an unpopular belief that I don't believe that abusers are 100% bad. And that is one of the main reasons that a lot of survivors remain, because they know the goodness in that person. And so if some of you have heard of the cycle of violence, whereas you have a honeymoon period and everything's going fine, and then there's some tension. And then there's an incident of violence, whether it be verbal or physical or financial or emotional. And more often than not, the perpetrator will come back and say, I am so sorry. And as a partner of someone like that, how could you not have empathy and feel bad for them, right? And what often comes next is, it will never happen again. So we coast through the honeymoon period, and then there's that tension period, and then another act of abuse. Oftentimes survivors can see the very good in those people as well. And it's so important to them. One thing, and I think as well-meaning friends, family, coworkers, community members, question that always comes up is, why don't you leave? And so for a person that's been controlled and manipulated, sometimes they feel like they don't have the power to leave. And sometimes they have valid reasons for staying. Valid reasons such as financial, religion, familial pressures, immigration. We've had so many survivors tell us, if I leave, my children are alone with that person. At least if I'm in a home, I can protect my children. And please, let's not forget the pets. Oftentimes, sometimes, especially with the perpetrators of domestic violence, desperate people do desperate things. And there is nothing more desperate than a perpetrator who feels like their partner may be leaving. And so that's when they up the ante a little bit. They may threaten the children, they may threaten the partner, they may threaten their lives, they may threaten the animals. They may instill in them reasons why they can't leave. And so it is never our role to say they should. Just as everyone up here has already said, it is our role to listen and to figure out the best ways to keep them safe. And that is.
Thank you, and I realize that's kind of a tough question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. This is a very difficult subject to deal with, and these experts bring it home in describing how difficult it truly is. But imagine if you're a prosecutor or a trial attorney, the case goes to court, there's got to be consideration given to deterrence and accountability. And so that's why, at least in my experience, consulting with people like the people on the stage right now is so important. Because you've got to be able to gain perspective from what these people tell us and how we go forward with the trial. But I will tell you that in my experience, when you get to the trial level, depending on the facts, and they're all different, I acknowledge that they're all different sets of facts. In the back of your head, when you're preparing or making decisions going forward, you've got to be able to consider accountability and deterrence. Because many times in these trials, the goal is to make sure it doesn't happen again. These people are in trouble. Like definitely believe they're absolutely vital in what we do with travel.
Thank you, sir. Our next question is, what barriers and challenges might individuals encounter when they're attempting to leave a abusive relationship? And then how do cultural and community factors influence these challenges? So again, this is going to be for you, Shay, and for Michelle.
The many survivors will talk about barriers such as financial barriers. They have nowhere to go. They don't have a support system and they don't have a way to support themselves. Oftentimes we hear about stigma. We'll hear about shame, whether it be cultural or religious factors. Maybe they grew up in a family where divorce is not something that is possible. Maybe it's frowned upon. Barriers, like I mentioned, if they leave that person, their children may be alone with that person. Maybe they feel that if they're in the home, they can protect their children and pets. Also, fear. So especially for survivors that have been in domestic violence relationships for a very long time, their self-esteem is low. Maybe they honestly feel like I can't leave. There's no way I can leave. And can we talk about the threats? Maybe that person has said to them, if you leave, I will do this. And sometimes those threats are that they will kill them. I once worked with a survivor whose abuser told her, if he ever sent her flowers, that would mean he knew where she went. And when she did leave, she received flowers at her job. So something that to us would look so sweet or innocent, to a survivor, that is a real threat. That is a real threat. And maybe they're afraid to call on. Maybe they're afraid to get help. Maybe they're afraid of what their family might say. Maybe they have no other support. Jackie mentioned the isolation piece. Perpetrators of domestic violence want to isolate those that they're in a relationship with, because then they can gain more power and control over them. They go over that for a long period of time. That honestly leaves the person with no one. And survivors will also talk about, I know my family is tired of me talking about this. My friends are tired of me talking about this. I've lost all my friends. And so there are so many barriers as to why people, why survivors may not. And I think if I could just mention one of the things that as a community in Loudoun County and the stakeholders on the stage and elsewhere, we do so well, especially with our DART, our domestic abuse response team, is we all have different roles, but we all have the same goal. And so in working together, when we identify those survivors that have contacted law, that have come through Tahari, that are involved in the criminal justice system, we do so well at working with one another to say, okay, these are the challenges that the survivor has. What can we do, not only as service providers, but as a community to assist them? And it's not uncommon to hear a survivor say, I love my friend. Maybe they have mental health issues. Maybe they're struggling with addiction. And I can't leave them because then what would happen to them? And so for anyone listening, whether it be a service provider, whether it be law enforcement, whether it be a family or friend, our job is to listen and not judge. Survivors have had enough judgment, right? And if we're honest, as far as we've come with domestic violence resources and services and education, there's still a stigma. How many people have had that house in their neighborhood? We can hear the yelling, right?
Or maybe you sense something's just not quite right. Maybe we don't know what to do or how to approach it, and so we don't. And so those survivors are often left to suffer in silence. Maybe they don't know where to go. Maybe they don't know that there are resources out there. And so just that's so important. One of the things that we did months ago is I think it starts with our youth. I think it starts with our juveniles. Because as a juvenile, you grow up in an environment or a home like that, that's the norm to you. And so that also presents another barrier, because if that is all I know, how am I going to speak out differently? And so many of the players here on this stage have done events for juveniles, healthy relationship workshops. The work that's being done in our schools right now, coming after COVID, when many of these children who are experiencing domestic violence in home were isolated in those homes, those very homes, didn't have the escape to go to school. And so now our educators not only are out there educating, but they're having to identify those children that are struggling as well, which is another thing.
Patience is key, correct? Patience is key, right? Something probably to keep in mind. Patience with these people is key, because they're not gonna always do what you advise them to do, or you ask them to do. You've gotta be patient.
Anderson makes a good point. We know that it takes a survivor, I think it's between 7 to 11 times to leave an abusive situation. And I think one of the stigmas with law enforcement is that, oh, if I report now, that's it. That's, that's sort of the barrier, that's the end line. That's sort of the beginning of the end, right? And what I often say is, I would rather have a victim that isn't ready to report, that I can direct to laws or another partner organization 10 times. If it means the 11th time, they have that faith and that trust in me, where we can say, okay, now we're ready to move forward. So law enforcement does listen, we do care. We are also very victim focused. We practice trauma informed interviewing. And so, that sort of stigma of law enforcement, just grabbing whoever is nearest and throwing away the key, that's not accurate at all. Over 95% of our officers are CIT trained. So we go a long way to practice that patient that Mr. Anderson mentions.
In addition to everything that has already been shared, I would like to offer a reflection about barriers. Oftentimes we look at survivors and identify their barriers, but I do think that also the world of advocacy, policy, and agency can be barriers to our survivor, particularly because you can imagine, especially in the nonprofit world, our work is limited by the funding we receive. And so those funding can restrict what we do, when we do it, and who do we do it with. And so because of that, really bringing awareness in the community and really raising awareness is an important factor, particularly because it forces us to reflect on our own prejudices and biases, which we all bring to the table, even with the best intent. In the immigrant community, I will just share that oftentimes one of the misconception is that the majority of immigrants here in the United States come because they're fleeing violence from their home country. That's also the narrative that we hear. The reality is that the majority of immigrants face a crime here in the United States. 80% of immigrants that we help have suffered a crime here in the United States. And their reporting is so fundamental to our law enforcement colleagues, because it is through that collaboration that then we can detect crimes and really help with putting a stop to also the violence that they're experiencing. So I wanted to offer that because it usually is a statistic that kind of makes people reflect and maybe even surprise people, because oftentimes the narrative is very different.
Thank you all. Our next question is about this in part, so we'll start with what questions can we ask to support victims in a safe and effective manner while assessing their needs and risks? We're going to cover separately what questions we shouldn't ask next. There's a focus on what questions we can ask to support victims. This is where Diana Rodriguez and Mr. Anderson.
So what questions? I think before getting to that, is really what environment are we creating in our, as a state for laws, what environment are we creating so the survivor feels safe and supported to share what's going on and to ask for help, right? Like as a survivor, are we, keeping are we using an interpreter if the survivor doesn't speak English? Are we welcoming them with a warm smile when they enter our office? Do we ask, hello, how are you? Do we introduce ourselves, or do we jump straight into facts and what happened in interrogation? No. So it's really important to be mindful of what environment we're creating to make sure that the survivor feels safe to share. And then we get to the questions. As Valerie mentioned, not so much what did you do, like what happened to you? How can we help you? Introducing yourself and kind of setting up the, explaining your role, what services you provide. And laws, your first thing to mention is how our services are free, are confidential, and are voluntary, right? What does that mean? Especially with voluntary, that's not a term I usually heard until I joined this kind of work. And it's really focusing on the self-determination of the individual, and we are going to help people that only want help, right? We are not, people can't be referred to laws that are like mandated by court to do something. No, all our services are voluntary. We want to make sure that the survivor wants help because we can't help somebody that doesn't want to be helped. So it's asking them, how can we support you, right? Because also as helpers, sometimes, especially I'm guilty of this sometimes when I was an advocate, where over the years you hear some stories, you're already problem solving in your head. Oh, this is what's happening with them. This is what they need to know. And then it's like, slow down, take a deep breath, and be present and listen to the survivor because they know what they need, right? It's like, oh, I'm here thinking like you can get protected, or you can do this, you can do that. It's like, well, I need help with rent, or I need help with bus ticket, or I need to get diapers for my child. Like this is where I'm at. And so we have to meet survivors there. So our needs assessments could look different, right? Which is getting basic information, very important to find out what's a safe contact number, what's a safe way to contact the survivor, if their phone number is safe, is it safe to leave a voicemail, is it safe to is their email safe, is their phone off, checked by their abusive partner, do they have transportation? Like we kind of have to figure out like what the immediate needs are before we get to the heavy stuff. And just really remembering that survivors are not just survivors of abuse, they're whole humans, it's really building that genuine connection, building rapport with that person. You are asking them to trust you and share some of those intimate details that you probably never shared with anyone before. So there's honor in that, and we just have to really respect what they're willing to share, not ask questions to be curious or to understand, but just to be like, to better assist them and connect them to resources.
Technology. I got say that if I'm in a group and I say something that makes sense, I always know it because Elizabeth's shaking. Okay, so we've got a situation where I agree with everything you just said. What we have tried to do, and what we're trying to do, is to, in many cases, put a victim of violent activity in a environment that is conducive to communication. And so basically, within the crime victim, DIV, domestic violence, these people are interviewed in a area that is a little separated and it's very comfortable, or at least more so than the courthouse offices. And so basically, one of the things that I personally believe is that's conducive to communication, and I agree 100%. You've got to get, particularly maybe some victims more than others, in a position where they trust you. And they can tell you and talk to you and communicate with you. And I think what we have at this particular point in time is that environment that allows them to come forward and tell you what happened. And again, we took office in January. We've seen a couple of cases now where people just don't want to cooperate. And that's why I said you've got to be patient because there's probably a likelihood that these individuals that come forward that don't want to communicate and are not cooperative are going to be back. And so there will come a point in time when they will trust you enough, but you need to be able to establish the fact that they trust you. And it's not their fault.
All right, thank you. And for our next question, this would be for Ms. Sinai and Ms. Puppy. What types of questions or approaches can inadvertently harm victims or create personal barriers?
When we talked about power and control, we are often the ones that are in authority, the ones who are seated here. So we must not do the same thing. And we must be aware of ourselves and take the approach that, just as you said, that we should be the ones listening, not blaming, and wondering, why are you still in this situation? Those are the things we have to be aware of, self-awareness. We see people suffer and we want people to get help. And as helpers, we might be overzealous in trying to do just that. So we must be very careful and self-aware, not to blame, not to try to make decisions for people. If we're trying to make the decisions, then again, that's part of the abuse that they are already suffering with the power and the control. So we must be mindful of those things. So blaming, why haven't you left yet? Here's an escape route, I can help you with that. Those are not the kinds of questions or statements that we should make. Sometimes as service providers, it makes us feel comfortable because we want someone else to be safe. But we must allow persons to make those decisions, just as you said, Diane. And as you said, it takes patience, right? It also, it's a risk. Right? It's a risk. We don't want anyone else to be harmed, but we must be aware and allow persons to make those decisions, and we help facilitate it. One of the things in what we see in protective services, and I just really want to share this, you mentioned the lethality assessment. I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to actually be a part of that, and one of the officers was in with me talking with this family. And you mentioned the approach to the patients. It took us about 3 hours to actually work through that situation. Our calm voices, our listening, and separating one from the other, hearing the stories. It was a good experience because we didn't go in saying, I'm going to arrest you. The police officer didn't say things like that at all. but was very supportive, and that's what really works. Because again, we do not want to re-victimize with the authority that we have.
Thank you. I would only add, that it's important also not to criminalize certain behaviors that may come out of the abuse, and it's very important to understand the context. For example, if an individual is forced to work without authorization because they have no other recourse, it is important to understand the why and the context in which such a decision is made, because it comes down to survival. Or if a person self-defend in a situation where they're being attacked, that's another way to really look at the context and not jump to conclusion, despite the fact that we may require to jump to certain responses, whether it's because of the law or because of any particular mandate. But that's another aspect that I would include.
And I think we've highlighted a lot of the barriers and challenges that can come with reporting domestic violence. I want to ask you a really important question of why should we? What are the benefits and potential outcomes of reporting domestic abuse? And how can reporting create a path to safety? And for this, we will go to Sergeant Goldberg and Mr. Anderson.
Okay. All right. Well, obviously, as I said before, deterrence is an issue. And it might not be the specific set of people that you have now currently victims, so it could be other victims. Could be a number of areas that benefit from the expertise going forward with these cases the right way. If they don't go forward, then basically, it's been my experience, that there's a likelihood that it's gonna happen, that will happen again. So basically, I think I maybe already addressed that, but I can tell you that it's important to proceed with the issue at hand. Because again, it serves as a deterrence, and it is something that somebody needs to be accountable. The right way to deal with that is after you've done the analysis with the experts that you have, to be able to know which way to go for, depending on what the facts are of that particular case. And I think that's already been said. Those are unique, so there's unique to that particular case. I think there's nothing really else we have to say about that.
I would sum it up in one word, really, and that's options. A lot of survivors don't know what the options are until they are involved in the process. And many of them are surprised at the wide array of options that they have. So if they're not comfortable moving forward with the court process, then we're not participating in it yet. They're not ready yet. They can still go to our partners in the laws, they can go to Curie. There are resources from the Department of Family Services. There are resources from CPS. There are so many agencies that are part of this work and can offer so many different options for them. So I think it's really important that they can become at least aware of what those options are, so they can start to chart a path forward. We do have victims that come to us and say, well, I want you to put my partner in anger management, or I want you to make them go to rehab. I want them to just get counseling and be a better person. And that's, in those instances, I always say, that's not something that law enforcement can do. We don't have that capacity, but we work with amazing organizations, many of whom are represented here tonight. And I can refer them out to those organizations and say, I think this is really worthwhile. And that helps to build that trust and that rapport, so that if and when that victim is ready to come and report and go through the court process, then they have that trust already established. They know they can count on us to give them the information that they need to make the best decision for themselves and where they're at.
Can I add to that as well? So I have one word for this question too, and that is accountability.
Offenders have got to be held accountable for their actions, right? That is what I want everyone that I deal with to know when they come into my office. You have to be held accountable. That said, nothing changes if nothing changes, right? So there are wonderful programs out there, i.e. our domestic violence program that we refer people to at Life Science Health. And most of the probation officers or probationers are not excited about starting a class that the court is ordering, right? Nobody comes in there and goes, yay, I'm so excited to be doing this. But the court tells them they need to do it. And it's always remarkable how many people enjoy the class after 3 or 4 sessions. And when they get in it and deeper in it and understand that they also have an awful trauma history that got them to where they are, but they make changes. And when we talk about relationships that don't always end, right? The victim stays with the survivor stays with the offender for one reason or another that we've talked about. So how can we improve that relationship? If you're going to say we want to keep you safe, there are options, but if you want to stay, that's your choice. But let's improve the relationship. Let's improve the offender. Let's hold the offender accountable. Let's put them in these classes in hopes that they can make changes to better themselves as well. Because I see so many people that do make positive changes. Not everybody's in there, not everybody makes changes, and there's plenty of people just go through the motions. But there are people that do want to do better. They do want to be a better person, and they want to be a better partner. So there is positive change that does come out. So when I see, we ask this question of what is the benefits of reporting, we all know the benefits to victims, but there are benefits for the offenders too.
Thank you for those responses. Our next question is what crimes may co-occur in the context of domestic violence? So Mrs. Smith and Mr. Anderson.
When I looked at that question the first time, I thought, over the years, cases that I've been involved in, what other factors were there? A lot of substances, a lot of substance abuse. A lot of people that think that is the aggressor, the person that's committed the crime, believes they're the victim. There's a lot of people out there that just will not believe that they could do what they've done as far as damage to another person. They're the victim. They were driven to it. There's a sense of power that I'm not the person who should be the defendant. The victim is. And so they rationalize. A lot of these people can rationalize many things. In other words, you were to sit down and try to talk common sense to them, you'd probably get nowhere. They didn't create the situation, the victim did. So, I mean, there's no excuse for violence, injury, damaging another human being who is a family member or companion. And you can't rationalize with an individual that will be rationalized with. So when you look at these cases, you see a lot of other factors that come into it. I'm not a psychologist. From a other issue involving other criminal charges, there's a whole list of them. And if you were to ask them whether or not that contributed, obviously their answer would be no. But the victim is the one who's at fault. So I don't, at this particular moment in looking at something like that with an individual who was an aggressor, who's capable of doing damage, I don't know what, if anything, can be done if the victim is not willing to do
So, you anything you want to add on that one for
If I could
add, and I want to piggyback off something that Jackie said. So many perpetrators also have their own trauma. So as Bob said, you see crimes such as substance use, and drug offenses. You may also see just general assault and battery, if that person is trying to kind of maintain themselves, but they can't always. And I'd like to highlight something. What an incredible ask that we ask of survivors who are involved in the criminal justice system, especially in juvenile domestic relations court. They may report because they want the abuse to stop. So many survivors will say, I didn't, just as Sergeant Goldberg said earlier, I don't want him or her arrested. I just want this to stop. And then oftentimes when we step in to assist them because they're going through the criminal justice process, they're overwhelmed. We ask them to participate. We ask them to come to court and tell their story after they've already told their story to a majority of us here on this very stage. And then more often than not, after that hearing, they know that they're going to go home with that person. There's fear there. It's an incredible ask. And so part of that trauma-informed response that we talked about is if you have a victim who is not cooperating, it is not because they want to make things hard. It is not because that they have ill intent. That may be the way that they're keeping themselves and their children and their family and maybe even their partner safe. It is not uncommon for perpetrators of domestic violence, especially if they're grasping to hang on to their partner, to threaten suicide. And who wants to be responsible for someone that they love to end their own life? And so coming to court is scary for survivors. It is overwhelming, and sometimes it may very well put them in danger. And can we talk about other vulnerable populations as well? We have come so far in the LGBTQ+ community. However, domestic violence occurs in those homes as well. And you may have someone who has been victimized in the past, who is so reluctant to come forward, and they may find themselves in the criminal justice system. And so their relatives, their family, their coworkers are also involved by pregnancy. And so it is very difficult for those vulnerable populations. Populations where, and I know we covered this too, where English is not their first language. Can you imagine going into a courthouse, having to tell your story? And we've had instances where an interpreter is not available. We've had instances where a juvenile has attacked his mother and there's not a man or an interpreter available. Can you imagine experiencing all that, and these decisions are being made with regard to your family, to your child, and you don't understand it, and nor can you express yourself in your native tongue. And so a lot of great things can also, and I don't want to end on a negative note, but a lot of great things happen in the criminal justice system too. Many survivors think that if they go to court, that the prosecutor wants to put their partner in jail, right? And is solely focused on punishment. And we are so fortunate that we have so many threads of restorative justice in our criminal justice system. Things like prosecutors putting forth for our probation officers, things like mental health evaluations, substance abuse evaluations, monitoring them, giving the perpetrator a resource so that they can get help too with the trauma that they've incurred. There are so many positives. And so from a victim witness standpoint, and from our incredible prosecutors in this administration, we try to put that forward to them and communicate that our intention is not to harm their home. Our intention is not to harm the perpetrator. Our intention is to keep them safe
to hold the perpetrator accountable, and to keep the community safe as a whole too. And so there are so many good things that also happen in the criminal justice system. It's just a matter of communicating those things to survivors that we serve. Yeah, very quickly. An interesting fact, I think, piggyback on the positives that can happen. You all may not know that in Virginia, there was no floor for the age required to marry. And that is always a very big surprise. And so through advocacy and policy changes, the Tamara Justice Center was able to change that and raise it to 18 years old. Why do I share that? I share that because one of the ancillary crimes that happen often as within a family or household where domestic violence may happen is forced marriage. And that is again a pandemic it's called pandemic, that is happening in the United States, and it impacts U.S. citizens. And most of the time it impacts high schoolers. So we're talking about individuals who have not reached the age of majority, who are forced into marriages. And before raising the age, there was no mechanism that would allow a judge, a clerk, a law enforcement to really figure out what is the situation, and do you really want to get married? And now there are mechanisms in place. Now there is the opportunity to inquire and give a voice to the person who's being forced to get married, because before it was just parental permission without even inquiring. So these are some of the intersectionalities that we see, and thanks to the advocacy and policy and legal changes, we can rectify.
And I just want to go ahead and finish up with that question. A lot of you guys are saying the awesome stuff, by the way. I'm always fascinated when I see all these storms, because even I feel like I've been in this a while and I'm just learning so much. So it's great to hear from the experts. I just wanted to add a few more comments about what other crimes go along with domestic violence. Sergeant Goldberg mentioned a lot of them before on her short presentation there, but preventing a call from 911. Some people don't realize that that's a crime. So if I'm trying to call the police and I have my cell phone and I'm dialing 911, and offender grabs the phone and prevents me from doing that, that's actually a crime. And a lot of people don't think to report that. But abduction, we typically think of abduction as, oh, I'm going to duct tape someone, duct tape someone, throw them in a van and drive to the wilderness. That's not an abduction. An abduction is pretty much preventing someone from moving in the position that they're in. So if I'm standing in front of a bedroom and I'm not letting you out of that bedroom, and I'm saying we're going to stay in here and have this conversation, and you're going to talk to me, and you're going to listen to me, and you're not leaving until I'm ready to let you go, that's an abduction. Strangulation, the suffocation, the new law adjustment with that, which was amazing. Rape, right? Some people still think that you can have sexual intercourse with your partner and it's not a crime because they're my spouse. I'm allowed to do this. They're my property. No, that's not. It's a crime. But can you imagine having to go to court and testify to that in front of strangers, in front of people, and relive that awful incident? So you want to talk about barriers when you go to court. How about just having to sit up on that stand and ask awful questions, or excuse me, answer these awful questions, and then maybe a defense attorney who may not be sensitive to what's going on is accusing you of lying, making things up, twisting everything. That's really, really hard for someone to go through. So there's a lot of barriers with that as well. Some other things that if the survivor does have the strength to leave the relationship, now we're talking about additional charges, burglary, use of a tracking device, the animal abuse. People will break into homes, harm animals to get back to the survivor. Protective order violations. One of the things that I used to love to do, that was your use of word, but when I was a detective, domestic violence detective, I would listen to jail calls. And they were so informative. But some of the things that the abuser would say to convince the survivor to do things. It's us against the world. You can't cooperate with them. If you just would have shut up when I told you to, this wouldn't have happened. Things like that, that the abuser is calling that person every day. And when you talk about an incident and then court, at least 30 days, maybe 60 days, every day they're talking to them from jail. And once they get out, they're talking to them. So by the time court rolls around, it's really, really hard to convince someone that this is the right thing to do when a defender is saying, don't do this, I'm gonna go to jail, this is gonna happen, it's gonna ruin the family, blah, 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 I'll change, I'll go to church, I'll find Jesus. And now suddenly that victim is torn and doesn't know what to do. Use of profane language over public airways. So when you're calling someone up, if you're leaving voicemails and they're obviously really bad words, threats, that's also illegal. Okay, I think I covered it all.
Thank you. You're right. Unfortunately, it's a very exhaustive list. We're gonna end with one last formal question, and we'll open it up today to you to give a final comment and take questions from the audience here as well. So, for Sergeant Goldberg and Mr. Rodriguez, can you highlight specific resources in Loudoun County that are available to support survivors of domestic abuse and how these services can be accessed?
So yes, resources plus is laws. We are the designated provider for services to domestic and sexual assault survivors in the county. We're a nonprofit. All our services are free and confidential, and we serve all survivors regardless of gender, race, sexual orientation, primary language, or immigration status. We truly do serve all survivors as long as there is a connection to Loudoun County, whether they live in Loudoun County or they experience the violence here. So our comprehensive services, what does that mean? I started out at law as a bilingual advocate, so I can talk about advocacy all day. But advocacy services that involves, accompaniment to court hearings, especially protective order criminal hearings. As Jackie was sharing, that is, and Michelle too, like we're asking survivors when they're part of the criminal system to come to court, to testify and talk about these traumatic incidents. And it's wonderful to know that laws provides, again, this free service of having an advocate accompany you to court and navigate such a complicated system. Like it's scary enough for anybody who hasn't experienced trauma to go to court and be like, where do I even go? And then on top of that, and so imagine experiencing trauma and you're going to face you're going to face probably for the first time the person who harmed you in court and talk about what happened. So we provide advocacy services and accompaniment to these court hearings, a hospital accompaniment, especially the forensic exams after a strangulation or sexual assault has occurred. We have short-term trauma therapy. We have a wonderful adult trauma therapist in the room. And this is really focusing on stabilization and safety and understanding their response to trauma and providing those coping skills. We provide support groups for adult survivors, again, for all genders, so for all adult survivors. We also have legal services, as I mentioned earlier, and mentioned again, we are the only agency, TSA agency in Virginia that has in-house attorneys. We have an attorney for protective orders and for family law matters, especially particularly in custody, child support, and uncontested divorces. We also have the Child Advocacy Center, which is where forensic interviews take place for children who have not only experienced sexual abuses, but also for children who have witnessed or experienced domestic violence or neglect. What else? And so we got a lot of stuff to go. Shelter. I feel like we're so known in the community for emergency shelter that I'm sorry for not mentioning it. So yes, we have an emergency shelter that provides that emergency shelter for those in imminent danger. And it is a short-term shelter, and again, the primary goal is to place them in a safe environment. That way we can, we have an advocate working with them figuring out next steps, working with them towards their goals. And we can, in that shelter, it's a confidential location. We're working to build a new one, which is very exciting. More information to come on that. But it is, and again, shelter services for all genders. You know, LOS was formerly known as Loudoun Women's Shelter. That's when it was created in 1984. We just celebrated our 40th year anniversary. And we kept the acronym LOS because that's how we're known in the community. However, we really wanted to, for our title to signify that we don't just serve women survivors, we serve all survivors. So that's why it's kept the acronym, and then we kept domestic violence, sexual assault services. And let's see. That's some of the resources with laws, and just to add, with community partners, in addition to those in part of the county, I want to highlight those organizations that, especially culturally specific organizations that we worked with, Ashiana, Adams Center, DPRP, that's the Asian Pacific Islander Domestic Violence Research Project, Takeda, that's the Jewish Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Ayuda, Tahari. They refer clients to organizations, especially for immigration services, and that's a huge gap around, and we do not have an organization that provides immigration services. So, and these agencies are located outside of Loudoun. And then Northern Virginia Family Services, they have a football center, they have also comprehensive services as well. So there's a lot of collaboration involved in addition to what we're sitting here with those community agencies. And so I think the most important thing that I would ask, because there's so much information tonight, right, is to know that our hotline is 24/7. We have a 24/7 hotline. I can't believe I missed that. It's people in the resources and laws. Our hotline is confidential. You share as much information as you want. Like we accept like anonymous calls. The hotline is for survivors, but also loved ones or people that are worried about loved ones experiencing violence. They can ask, like, how do I help? Again, we can't tell them, we can't say like, oh, tell them to do this, but we can just inform them like, hey, believe them, listen to the person created, judgment is not going to help in this scenario. Tell them about us, tell them to call our hotline, a confidential hotline, and if it's not safe to call, because maybe a survivor doesn't have access to phone to a safe phone, then know that we accept walk-ins. Our hours are Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. We accept walk-ins, or if we have survivors call us from the store, or like we meet them somewhere, and you figure out if you get them a phone. Well, we are very creative at laws. Like advocates are wonderful in that we're flexible and adaptive, and so we'll problem solve as best we can. I think Diana covered it for the most part. But as was mentioned earlier, unfortunately, domestic violence covers all demographics, all social strata. So for anyone who's out there who thinks, oh, there's no one that can specifically help me with my situation, I think you'd be surprised at the incredible array of resources that we have available to us in Loudoun County. And I specifically want to highlight those agencies that came up here tonight. You can tell how passionate these wonderful people are. We want to help. We want to be a part of helping someone, build that path to a safe future. So whether it's law enforcement or laws or the Department of Family Services, the CA's office, we are all here to help. I would specifically like to highlight Ashiana. It's an organization that is culturally driven to assist victims of domestic violence who are part of the South Asian community. We have a very large South Asian community here in Loudoun County. Unfortunately, the representative from that agency wasn't able to be here tonight, but I did promise that I would let folks know that they are available. They are out there. You can find them online at ashiana.org. They do fantastic work. So it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, as long as you want help, there are organizations ready to assist.
And I would also highlight our victim advocate unit. If you're not sure where to start and you want to know what your options are, they're a wonderful resource. They can help point you in a variety of directions. I'll give you an example of a family locally who had a son who was nonverbal autistic. They were having a lot of issues with him acting out physically to express some of his frustrations. They weren't familiar with the Arc of Loudoun, which is an incredible organization that helps specifically with those issues. And so we were able, through the victim advocate unit, to link up that family with the Arc of Loudoun, and it's made a huge difference. So it's not just intimate partner violence, but really any kind of family violence that you may be experiencing. There are a wealth of organizations and wonderful people who want to help and want to help you move forward and build a safer future.
All right, thank you guys. Take a deep breath here. There's a lot of information to present here. Before I do one background to our presenters, do we have any questions out in the audience tonight? I'm going to ask you to use the microphone so you can hear you for everybody joining us live.
Hi, my name is Swallow Barry. I'm a victim. And I want to thank Detective Goldberg for helping with my case, and I don't know if Officer Cooper is here, and Laws. You guys are all very, very helpful. I appreciate that. So in all cases, the victim loves the abuser, and we want to raise awareness and get the word out. And I believe that transparency yields self-correcting behavior, and as you said, is a deterrent as well. But you don't want to shame the person, right? So where do you find that balance to raise awareness? I belong to the Catholic Church, and it's almost like people are calling it gossip when it's really you're just warning others, right? My abuser was a teacher, and I was really worried about her being with children and driving children, not just for my liability, but the liability of the church and potentially, obviously protecting children. So where do you draw the line with trying to warn and raise awareness and, like a few of you said, get her to stop, but also not shame them? And because you nailed it. I mean, usually the abuser was a victim at one point. And so how do you do that? So you can just comment. Shit.
I'll ask you to please chime in. Where there is a concern for public safety and the safety of others who may be at risk of being victimized, that is the role of law enforcement to investigate and follow up. That's where we would, take a lead on that end. In terms of the advocacy piece, I'm going to turn that over to Diana to start us off with.
If I understood correctly, you were talking about shaming the survivor or shaming the perpetrator. So we're human, right? Those kind of help. And it's really important to remember that these people, that the people that perpetrate violence and that are harming others, that they're not monsters, they're humans that are loved and most likely very much loved by the person that they're harming. So it's focusing more on the behavior and not the person, right? Because I don't know the person that saw them. I have no idea who they are. I don't know what's in their heart. I don't know their life story. I won't pretend to know it. All I know is that the actions that they're taking are harming the person in front of me that I'm trying to help. And so presenting it to the survivor that way, it's like where they would, I use several examples of survivors like, oh, well, he's a good dad. He's all these great things. And like, who am I to tell them that they're not that he's not a good dad? Like I'm not in their lives. I'm not there every day. But then I can just provide education and context. And like, I hear you. I can't pretend to know what is going on through this person's head when they're harming you, they are causing you harm. So it's focusing on what's within your control to do. How can you protect yourself? Because you cannot control another person. You know, as much as, you know, you are not responsible for another adult's actions. So focusing really on the actions, since you're not responsible for the other adult's actions, what can you do to stay safe? Because you, like, no one can make you safe. Like, no one can help you or ensure your safety without you being an active participant in that, right? So it's just really shifting focus on the actions, the concerning behaviors, and focusing back on, hey, what's within your control to do? These are your options.
Well, add into that too, and this is why these conversations are so great. To paraphrase J.K. Rowling, the day that you can stop blaming things on your parents is the day you turn 18, right? And while violence can be cyclical, it is not an inevitable conclusion, right? As soon as you turn 18, here in the great United States of America, you are legally responsible for the decisions you make and the consequences that come from them, right? So, for survivors, I would say, you know, kudos to you. You've made a decision not to be retaliatory. You've made a decision to say, you know, here's the line, and you can't cross it, right? And then that other person is also responsible unto themselves and unto the law, right? State and federal law, to play by the rules. And if they cross the line, if they break the law, then they need to be held accountable for those actions.
I think accountability is key. And then the second part I would like to offer is also the opportunity to see where gaps are present, right? So if there is a teacher who's committing such an act, most likely there's a gap in the system. And what can we do to address that behavior? What can we offer without necessarily focusing on the person, but what can we offer within the school system to make sure that these behaviors are going to be prevented, whether it's through background checks, whether it's through training, whether it is through better hiring processes, I don't know, but not to take the opportunity to really reflect on these gaps.
So following up, barrier crime, my understanding is that the law requires like a 5-year disqualification from working with children and elderly and disabled. You know, what if the mandatory reporter is not reporting and covering it up? How do you address that?
These issues that you're talking about are fact specific. I can't answer that question.
I would say it really depends on the case itself and how that would be handled, and I would probably defer to our special victims unit when it comes to those guidelines and those laws.
May I offer a reflection on this particular question, because I think it's very much in line with also what survivors may feel towards the perpetrator. You know, there is a bit of a carrying guilt and what comes with reporting and the consequences of reporting. If a survivor does not want to report, we want to give them agency, right? That is their decision, and we don't want to force it. However, the responsibility of the community is to know that these actions exist, right? That particular person may not want to report, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening in the community. So being able to question who's sitting at the table, being able to bring the question up to talk about it, even when we don't have the specific individual that comes up and reports it, I think that is the responsibility of the community. So that if we're sitting in a policy conversation, in a community conversation, in a law enforcement conversation, we look around and we're saying, are these decisions inclusive of everyone who may be impacted, whether it's LGBTQ community, whether it is immigrant community, whether it's any other marginalized community, women, men. We need to question ourselves and the policies that we bring forward to make sure that they apply to all of the individuals that may be impacted without waiting for us to be reactionary to an issue. We need to be proactive.
If I could also jump in on this one as well. First, I want to put a caveat that we're not going to trust individual specific situations here. We will have deputies available for us afterwards. If you want to have a case specific question, we can handle those like one-on-one. What about this scenario? What I would say, and if I can speak for everybody up here, every single one of us are leaders in our organization, and we are all committed to providing outstanding service. If there's ever a point that you're frustrated with a single point of contact within any one of these resources, I would reach out to that resource and say, I'm having a challenge, I'm having difficulty, I'm frustrated about this. You know, the sheriff's office, we have a complaint line, every single complaint goes to the sheriff and to our lieutenant colonels directly. And then we figure out where it needs to get routed out. And if there's a problem, if there's a breakdown in our services, we're going to fix that immediately. And I know these other organizations all do the same thing, that we care deeply about making sure we're doing it right. So if you ever have a problem and you run into it, don't accept the systems broke or it's not working for me. It may not be working right now, but it doesn't mean we can't get it working and we can't find the right way and find the right resource and whatever the services that that individual might need. So please don't stop after one. I guess we might have my biggest comment on that.
May I just add, if there's any suspicion of child abuse and neglect or elder abuse and neglect, you can make that report anonymously. So we just want to make sure that the community is aware of that. And thank you for saying that we do care. And if you do see gaps, we do want to work towards that.
Thank you. Good addition involved. Other questions tonight? Going once, going twice. Do we have anything online? Let me ask a question here. How has technology affected this space? And not trying to make it another half an hour, round-one conversation, but what are we seeing? We have air tags and all different tracking software components. What are we seeing today?
So, when I started on the police department a long time ago, we didn't even have cell phones, right? It was a lot simpler time, and you could just go to the store and not be bothered, know where you were, and you'd be home and nobody would know, and same thing with your kids, and everyone accepted that. And now, technology can work in our favor 100%, right? I have like 360 on my kids' phones. I'm not gonna, lie about that. I track where they are, and maybe I'm a stalker. I don't know, maybe. But unfortunately, the flip side to that is the offenders do use it to their advantage, and it goes back to the power and control and isolation. When you have someone that has to report to their abuser where they're going every minute of the day, the person is watching them, the person is getting in their car and seeing how many miles are out in the car. And they know that it's only 2 miles to the grocery store. And why do you have 10 miles on your car? What else did you do? Computers, a whole nother issue as far as spyware on the computers. Those are very hard to find. Those are very, very difficult to deal with because they can see every single thing you're doing, every keystroke. And but one of the challenges that I found, the hardest thing to deal with is spoofing of phone numbers. So this, I've always found this the biggest challenge and even as a probation officer, we have a victim outreach officer in my office who talks to the survivors when there's an issue with someone who's on probation. So I won't deal with them specifically, but our victim outreach officer does. And it's a wonderful program that we have now, and Sarah is amazing. But the victims report that I'm getting threats from this number, that number, and they can't trace it, right? Because there are so many programs out there that you can change your number every time. You can call someone and put in a number that looks like a number that they have saved, say mom. And they can send messages that look like they're coming from mom, or they can call and it looks like it's coming from mom. And obviously it's not mom. trying to prosecute something like that or even get charges for something like that is very difficult because you can't go back. A lot of times and pinpoint that person. It's very challenging. Let's talk about Snapchat. Snapchat was a great thing for kids, whatever. Now someone can send you a picture or a threat and it, theoretically disappears. There are ways to capture that at times, but a lot of times it doesn't stay out there for very long. So that can be challenging as well. I'm trying to think what other forms of users use. That's what I'm thinking off the top of my head.
I think you named many of them. I would add IP addresses or like another one that requires such a level of technology and savviness in terms of how to even work IP addresses. And we have to go through extensive training to understand how to block it because there's so many perpetrators that have become so savvy. And so they're able to track where an email comes from, what websites are they in, they're consulting. That's why most of our website, I think they have the panic button or like the escape button. But even in those cases, it doesn't seem to be sufficient because they're able to find where the individual is. So much so that one of our clients said the perpetrator show up at a shelter. And we have no idea, apart from probably they follow it, but those are also situations that once a shelter is exposed, it exposes many other people, not just the person that is being stalked. So it's a very hard area. And it comes with a lot of positives. Technology has helped us a lot, but it's a double-edged sword. And GPS technology, I think, is the worst because you really can't escape it, even when you turn it off, even when you think you turn it off. It's still working.
Well, I also want to expand on that, going everything else, that has been shared so far about technology. Also just what we're noticing too, just the normalization, especially with younger, folks, of like just having this constant access to anyone all the time. Like, we have a program that we also have that I forgot to mention is our domestic violence prevention. And that program has grown a lot in the past 2 or 3 years. And we put up workshops and do trainings to youth and parents about healthy relationships, how to talk to your kids, et cetera, et cetera. But as we're hearing feedback from not only parents, children themselves and also educators that we've interacted with, is how normalized stalking has become. Even casually saying stalking, like, oh, I'm just gonna stalk this guy just to see, because, we're on Tinder, clearly I'm not within the Tinder, right? Because I can't use the lingo that well. But it's just so normalized to just like, let me just stalk this person and see, and see what they do and who they're living with. So we're so casual in that term. But the normalization is so dangerous because then we work with survivors who are like, well, I have nothing to hide. So sometimes I can check my phone, I have nothing to hide. Or, oh, no, yeah, we're supposed to check each other's locations just to make sure we're not stepping out of the relationship. So it's still based on control. It's based on distrust. And it's very normalized amongst youth. And also, this kind of stalking with technology is an aspect of abuse, can be an aspect of abuse in intimate partnership, and sometimes gets ignored or minimized, or doesn't even get mentioned, especially if there's other more obvious things happening, physical abuse or strangulation. But stalking is ever there. And also, there's a lot of education that still needs to happen with the community, with in reporting it, with some officers charging it, or for the courts to take it seriously. So technology abuse and stalking go hand in hand. And I also want to highlight too that at Lost, we also provide services to stalking survivors, even if it's not related to intimate partners. Just because of the seriousness and the complete invasion of your life. Stalking. I just want to add one more thing. So It's so easy for us to go, hey, why don't you just get a new phone? Hey, why don't you just change your number? Hey, why do you need to keep your cell phone with you all the time? If you ask any one of us, at least I can speak for myself, hey, just don't get on your phone anymore. Don't get on the computer. Easier said than done, right? We are all attached. And the fact that we ask so much of victims to change because of what somebody's doing to them. You know, we're expecting them, oh, you feel like there's something on your vehicle, we'll just take it here. Take it to the shop, check for a GPS device on there. Just get a new phone, it won't cost anything. It always comes back to money, the finances people don't have typically. Why should the victims have to make all these changes? We should be focusing on the offender making the changes, right? But going back to technology, it's works in our favor a lot for our day-to-day life, but it just can be used against us, and it just really puts everybody into a novel situation.
All right, thank you.
And I think we would be remiss if we didn't bring up the age of social media. So even those who may not be survivors or victims, we live in an age where people check in where they are physically, or they're showing you what they're eating for dinner, or sharing information, or taking a picture of their brand new house, and the address is there. And so even if we're not talking specifically about different agencies of technology, there's still that social media piece. And so many of our juveniles, I don't think understand the safety risks that come with that. My own teenager can bring up on her phone where her friends are at any given time. And I think that poses a safety risk as well. So I think that education piece, especially for our kids, especially for our teens, is so important because they may not see the risk that exists with behaviors and doing that, putting themselves out there. Especially in talking about our juveniles. You guys seen how many friends they have on social media? And some of our juvenile victims will tell me, well, they're all my friends. Do you know where they go to school? Do you know what they do? No, but we're friends, on this app or that, so they're my friends. And so that term, especially with our youth, is used so loosely these days, and it can put any one of us at risk at any time.
All right, thank you. We're gonna wrap up here as we're running out of time. I'd like to offer, Jackie, I'm gonna start with you and work down the line, so it'll be a second to start thinking here. But I'd like to give each panelist an opportunity each to give us some final thoughts, give wrap it up in a minute or two. Anything you want to leave us with? Obviously, there's a lot we can talk about. We spent a ton more time discussing this topic. They've done a good job of trying to get as much as we can at the time we have. But it's your final thought on anything you want to provide up here.
First, so I guess the final thought would be that, you're not alone as a survivor, that as you've learned tonight, we are all here to support people, to not judge. It's okay if you're not ready to leave the relationship. It's okay. We're not here to judge. We want you to be safe. And we want to let everybody know that there are resources that they can go when they are ready to leave. If they want to leave, there's places to go. I know it can be challenging, especially in a county like this where there is so much money and unfortunately not enough money to survivors as far as housing and transportation and stuff like that. But I think we're getting better. I think we're improving, but just know that we're here to help.
And I'd love to echo that for survivors, for those that have loved ones who are survivors or are in dangerous situations in domestic violence. But I also want to leave a message for those who might see this, because I understand we're recording it as well. For those who might be perpetrators too, who might have incurred their own trauma
or choosing behaviors or harming those that they love, you're not alone either. And there is help and there is support and there's help and support without judgment. We're just waiting for you to reach.
I'll echo and echo and echo. Just remembering that this is a community, this is a problem in the community that requires a community response. No single agency can take this on, and you don't have to be a member of this agency to support a survivor, you know? Listen to your friends, listen, you know, pay attention to your, to your family, to your friends. If you notice something, you know, approach the person or offer, create a safe space for them to approach you. Making sure to believe survivors. That's like something that's so easy to do that we're here at Laws, that's immediate. We believe all survivors. We listen. We don't judge. We offer options. Connect them to law as if it's happening around you. And even if you're watching this and you know somebody that's not experiencing it around and somebody else somewhere else, you can still call us and we'll be happy to assess, to safety plan with the survivor, to connect, to give them information or even do a pointing out to the correct resource in their area. Our hotline is 703-777-6552. It's 24 hours. It's confidential. Again, echoing what Michelle and Jackie said about you don't have to, you know, the hot services that laws are not just for people that are ready to leave. It's for people who just want to know what's out there, what options there are, either to safely stay or to find out what to do if things escalate, find out their options. Information is power. And in a situation where you're experiencing disempowerment, where somebody's trying to take power away from you, correct information is key. Please reach out.
I would say that if you need us, use us. If the mission is important to you, support us. And if you wish to see change, fight with us. And so those are the words I would like to leave you with. In addition to, if you can't quite pronounce the name of our organization, which I understand is hard, maybe a helpful reminder that Ta Hooray is Ta and then hooray. So remember that in case you need it for yourself or if you know someone that may be in need of immigration service.
Domestic violence is a public health issue, and we're all responsible for helping increase awareness. And we want, just as been said before, we all want to help. We do understand that there have been circumstances in life, learned behaviors most often, when you've experienced it or if you actually are the person who creates some harm. I think that most people, at least that I have worked with over many years, about 37 years, have never encountered anyone who wanted it to happen. Never, ever, on either side. And so there is help, and we're waiting for you if you want that help.
So at the beginning of this, we live in a community that cares. That's important. Because if you find yourself in a situation like this, there are the resources to develop a plan to deal with it. And that is very encouraging to me.
I'm gonna get real back to basics here. If you feel that your safety is threatened at any time, call 911. You don't have to wait until someone is bleeding out. You don't have to wait until somebody has acted on violence. If you feel your safety is threatened, call 911. And we can work it out from there. I hope if anything else, you've seen tonight has made an impact. I hope that you see that law enforcement is also working in the 21st century. that we have incredible partners, that we work together as a team with our community partners in order to provide an informed and sensitive response that holds offenders accountable, but also helps survivors make those next steps forward in their lives. So if you feel your safety is threatened, call 911. You have options.
All right, thank you all again. Thank you guys for joining us tonight, whether you're in here or you're online. And I want to give a big thank you to our panelists for taking time out of your busy schedule to come here and help us all tonight. So thank you to you all. All right. I just want to repeat it again. So if you are in need of assistance or if you know someone who's in need of assistance, please reach out for help. Behind us on their screen, they're called our phone numbers. You have 911, you have non-emergency, you have laws, you have the national hotline. You can text 911 too. So if you're not in a position where you can't get to your phone or you don't want to be on the phone, you don't want that recognized, text. There's a million ways to reach out. Just pick one. I think that would be the biggest thing I can say. So thank you all again for your guys' time and participation. And we'll be around afterwards. There's some brochures and stuff outside in the lobbies too that we can meet for now. Thank you.